The first time I laid eyes on the crystal-clear waters of Lake Serenity, I knew I had found my sanctuary. The lake was tucked away behind a row of tall pines with glassy, tranquil waters that reflected the sun like a mirror. During sunset, the surface turned to molten gold, shimmering with warmth and peace. It was everything I had ever dreamed of. I bought the 3-acre lot at the edge of the lake 10 years ago, a humble patch of land with a small cabin and a narrow dirt path leading down to a private dock. Every morning, I would sit on that dock, coffee in hand, watching the sunrise melt away the fog hovering above the water. In the evenings, I would take out my canoe, gliding over the smooth surface, letting the soft lapping of the waves wash away the day's stress. It was my escape from the world, just me, the water, and the occasional call of a loon in the distance. When I first heard that the Bentwood Lakeside HOA was forming, I didn't pay much attention. It started off as just a group of neighbors wanting to make minor improvements to the area, paving a few roads, fixing broken street lamps, and organizing weekend barbecues. But over time, their ambitions grew. They began enforcing stricter rules, fining homeowners for minor violations. A flower bed too close to the road? $250 fine. A shed painted the wrong shade of beige. $400 fine. Laundry left outside overnight. $150 fine. I still didn't care. My property was on the outskirts, far removed from their HOA nonsense. Or so I thought. One summer afternoon, I walked down to the dock with my fishing rod in hand. But as I approached the shoreline, I stopped dead in my tracks. A large metal fence with a chain-link gate blocked the path to my dock. A private property. HOA members' only sign was nailed to the post. I blinked in disbelief. I turned to Paul Jennings, my next-door neighbor, who was walking his dog along the shore. "Hey, Paul," I called out. "What the hell is this?" He glanced at the gate and shrugged sympathetically. "HOA put it up last night," he said. "Said they're limiting lake access to approved members only." I stared at him, stunned. "What do you mean, approved members?" I asked, the word sharp with disbelief. "You own property on the lake. You're not approved?" Paul shook his head. "Apparently not." Fuming, I marched back to my cabin, grabbed my HOA notice, and dialed the contact number. Margaret Green, the HOA president, answered with her usual condescending tone. "Hello, this is Margaret Green, president of the Bentwood Lakeside HOA. How can I help you?" I gritted my teeth. "Yeah, Margaret," I said tersely. "I'm standing at my property line, staring at a gate blocking access to my own damn dock. Care to explain?" I could hear the smirk in her voice. "Oh, Mr. Carter," she said sweetly. "The HOA board voted last week to secure the lake for HOA members only. It's for safety reasons, you understand." I clenched the phone tighter. "Safety reasons?" I snapped. "I've had unrestricted access to that lake for 10 years. You can't just fence it off." Her tone turned smug. "Actually, we can," she replied. "The HOA recently acquired the access point to the lakefront. Since your property is technically outside the HOA's jurisdiction, you no longer have direct access. But of course," she added with mock sympathy, "you're welcome to apply for an HOA membership that will give you access for a modest annual fee." My stomach turned. "You mean I have to pay you to access my own damn lake?" I hissed. She gave a fake laugh. "Oh, no, not pay us. Just contribute your share to community maintenance costs. You understand, right? Lakeside properties require upkeep." I hung up the phone before I could say something I'd regret. The next morning, I called Daniel, my lawyer. We met at a local cafe, and I laid out the whole story. The fence, the blocked access, and Margaret's smug offer to allow me to apply for access to my own land. Daniel grimaced as he scrolled through the legal documents on his tablet. "This is a mess," he muttered, shaking his head. The HOA purchased a narrow strip of land along the lakeshore, giving them legal grounds to block public and private access. Technically, they're within their rights. I gripped my coffee mug so tightly my knuckles turned white. So what? I just let them take my access. Daniel leaned back, watching me carefully. "There's one option," he said slowly, a mischievous glint in his eye. "You could buy the shoreline." I stared at him, confused. What? He pulled up a map of the lake. See this? He said, pointing at the lake's perimeter. The HOA only owns this narrow strip of land blocking access. But the shoreline itself? It's still privately owned by a few different individuals, most of whom aren't even HOA members. I blinked. You're telling me I could buy the entire shoreline and block them out? Daniel's smirk widened. Exactly. Over the next 2 months, I contacted every private landowner along the lake. Most of them were elderly couples or out-of-state owners who had inherited the land and had no use for it. One by one, I made cash offers. The Graysons sold me their 4-acre lakeside plot for $170,000. The Bennett family sold me their 2-acre woodland stretch for $130,000. An old vacant campground along the southern edge was mine for $250,000. By the end of the 3rd month, I had purchased 94% of the shoreline. On a warm Saturday morning, I strolled over to the HOA's lakeside gate. Margaret was there, supervising a members-only lakeside event. Her voice was loud and commanding, barking orders at her minions. I stood at the gate, arms crossed, and waited until she noticed me. When she saw me, her lips curled into a smirk. "Oh, Mr. Carter," she said condescendingly. "Sorry, but this event is for members only." I smiled, reaching into my pocket, and pulled out a stack of property deeds. "Actually, Margaret," I said, holding them up, "I own the shoreline now." Her face drained of color. "What?" she stammered. I gestured toward the waterfront. "You're trespassing on my land, Margaret." Margaret's eyes widened as she stared at the stack of property deeds in my hand. "W, what are you talking about?" she stammered, her voice trembling slightly. "You can't possibly." I cut her off, my voice calm but firm. "I can, and I did." I slowly unfolded the deeds, one by one, and spread them out on a nearby picnic table. Several HOA board members wandered over, curious about the commotion. Their faces quickly turned pale as they read the documents. "Wait, these are," one of them mumbled, pointing at the seals. "These are official property titles." I turned to Margaret, smiling coldly. "That's right," I said smoothly. "I now own the shoreline. All of it." Her smirk faded, replaced by a look of pure panic. She grabbed the deeds, flipping through them, her hands trembling. This can't be legal," she snapped. "You can't just buy up the entire shoreline." I shrugged. "Actually, I can." I replied casually. "And I did. You know, it's amazing how many people were eager to sell their neglected and used shoreline property when they realized they could make a quick buck." The crowd of HOA members around us began to murmur, clearly confused and alarmed. "Wait, what does this mean?" one woman asked. "Is the HOA not in charge of the lake anymore?" Margaret's face flushed red with fury. She turned toward the crowd, her voice trembling with fake authority. "Everyone, please," she called out. "This man is trying to intimidate us. The HOA still owns the access point. He can't keep you from the lake." I pulled out another document from my briefcase, my ace in the hole. "Actually, Margaret," I said smoothly, handing her the paper, "you might want to take a look at this." She snatched it from my hand and scanned the page, her eyes narrowing. Her jaw dropped. It was a cease and desist order signed by a judge. "What is this?" she barked, glaring at me. I smirked, enjoying the moment. "That, Margaret, is a legal order to stop all HOA activities on the shoreline." I explained. "Since you no longer own the access points, any further enforcement of your lake restrictions constitutes trespassing." The crowd gasped. Several HOA members turned to each other in shock, exchanging confused and anxious glances. "Wait, he owns the entire lakefront," one man whispered. "He can block us out completely?" I folded my arms, my smile widening. "That's right." I announced loudly so everyone could hear. "From now on, you'll need MY permission to access the lake." The next morning, Margaret called an emergency HOA meeting. I arrived early and sat right in the front row, arms crossed. Margaret's face was pale and drawn, her usual smug expression replaced with one of thinly veiled desperation. The room was packed with angry homeowners, many of whom were clearly frustrated with the HOA's antics. Margaret cleared her throat, but her voice was noticeably shaky. "We're here to discuss recent developments regarding lake access," she said. "Unfortunately, due to certain legal technicalities, there have been some issues." Someone in the back shouted loudly, "You mean the part where Carter owns the whole damn lakefront now?" A ripple of laughter rolled through the crowd. Margaret scowled, her knuckles white as she gripped the podium. "We are working with our legal team to explore options," she continued through gritted teeth. "But rest assured, the HOA will do everything in its power to protect your access." I stood up. "Actually, you won't," I called out, my voice firm and confident, "because, as of this morning, the HOA no longer has jurisdiction over the lake. The shoreline is now private property, my property." The room erupted in gasps and whispers. Margaret's eyes widened with fury. "You can't do this," she hissed, her voice trembling. "You're ruining this neighborhood with your petty vendetta." I stepped forward, my voice calm but commanding. "No, Margaret," I said. "You ruined this neighborhood when you decided to turn it into a dictatorship. I'm just restoring the balance." Several homeowners in the crowd clapped, and a few even cheered. That evening, I took my final step. I hired a team of contractors to install private fencing and security cameras around the entire shoreline. Private property, no trespassing, signs were placed every 50 feet. I added a small dock for myself and a few invited friends. I even installed a fire pit and seating area, creating my own private retreat. The next morning, the HOA board members arrived at the lake, ready to hold their weekly event. They were stunned when they saw the new fence and the no HOA access signs. Margaret's face turned red with fury. "Carter," she screamed, pounding on a lock gate, "you can't do this." I walked out onto my dock, holding a cup of coffee, and casually waved at her. "Oh, but I can," I called back with a satisfied grin. "You're trespassing, Margaret. Better call your lawyer." Several HOA members tried to argue and protest, but my new security team showed up and politely escorted them away. A few days later, Margaret filed a lawsuit against me, claiming my purchase of Shoreline was a malicious act. Her lawyer tried to argue that I had committed predatory acquisition, but Daniel, my lawyer, was 5 steps ahead. "The HOA's case is flimsy at best," Daniel explained confidently. "You acquired the land legally. They have no claim." 2 weeks later, the judge ruled in my favor. The HOA was officially barred from accessing the lake without my permission. Margaret was forced to pay my legal fees. Her reputation shattered. She resigned from her position as HOA president. After the victory, I invited the entire neighborhood, minus the HOA board, to a lakefront barbecue on my newly private shoreline. The grill sizzled with burgers and steaks. Kids splashed in the water. Neighbors toasted with ice-cold beers. As the sun set over Lake Serenity, I leaned back in my lawn chair, watching the HOA board members drive by in their golf carts, glaring enviously at festivities. I smirked, taking a slow sip of my drink. "Enjoy your fence, Margaret," I muttered with a grin. "I'll be over here, enjoying my lake." I should have known Margaret wouldn't go down quietly. Even after losing the lawsuit and being forced to pay my legal fees, she still had one final trick up her sleeve. It started with small annoyances. HOA board members would loiter near my property, making a point to stare at my guests and mutter under their breath. Then came the petty complaints. I received anonymous noise violation reports, even though my gatherings were always quiet and civil. I got complaints about unauthorized lighting, even though my security lights were perfectly legal. The HOA even tried to report my dock to the county, claiming it was built without a permit, but none of it stuck. I had all my paperwork in order. Every detail was legal and flawless. Still, I knew Margaret was scheming. One afternoon, I was working on my boat dock when I saw a group of county officials pull up to my gate. A man in a suit, clearly some kind of inspector, approached me with a clipboard in hand. "Mr. Carter?" he asked formally. "I'm here on behalf of the Environmental Protection Agency. We received a complaint regarding environmental violations on your shoreline property." I narrowed my eyes, instantly suspicious. "Environmental violations?" I repeated, What kind of violations? He glanced at his clipboard. It appears you were reported for illegal tree removal and shoreline tampering. I scoffed, folded my arms. You mean the dead trees I had removed by a licensed arborist? The inspector glanced at me with mild surprise, clearly not expecting me to be prepared. Oh, you have documentation for that. I walked over to my storage shed, pulled out a folder of permits, and handed it over. Every tree I removed was either diseased or dead. I said calmly, here are the inspection reports, the arborist's findings, and the county's written approval. The inspector's eyes widened slightly as he scanned the flawless paperwork. Huh, he muttered, flipping through the documents. This all looks perfectly legal. I smirked. Imagine that. As the inspector returned to his car, Margaret and 2 other HOA board members stood across the road, watching smugly from a distance. I walked over with a slow, confident stride. Hey, Margaret. I called out. Next time you file a fake environmental complaint, you might want to make sure I'm not 2 steps ahead of you. Her smirk faded instantly. Later that evening, I received a call from Daniel, my lawyer. His voice was practically gleeful. You're going to love this, he said with a chuckle. That fake environmental report Margaret filed? Well, the county did some digging, and it turns out she falsified multiple complaints over the past year. I raised an eyebrow, intrigued. Multiple complaints? I asked, you mean against me? Daniel laughed softly. Nope, against half the neighborhood. She was bullying homeowners with fake violations and using them to boost HOA fines. The county found out, and they're opening an investigation into her. I grinned. Karma's a beautiful thing, isn't it? Over the next several weeks, the county's investigation gained traction. It turned out Margaret had been running a racket. She filed false complaints, enforced bogus fines, and pocketed kickbacks from shady contractors hired by the HOA. When the county presented their findings at a public hearing, the neighborhood erupted with anger. Homeowners came forward with stories of harassment and baseless fines. One man, Mr. Ellison, held up a stack of bogus tickets and shouted from the back of the room, "She fined me $1,200 for a garden statue. She said it was a safety hazard." Another woman, Mrs. Clark, held up her phone, playing a recording of Margaret threatening her. She said if I didn't pay the fine, she'd have my fence torn down. That's extortion. Margaret's face was red with humiliation, her eyes wild and desperate. The HOA board voted unanimously to remove her from her position. She was also charged with fraud, fined heavily, and barred from holding any community leadership role ever again. As she was escorted out of the meeting, her furious eyes locked onto mine. "You'll pay for this," she spat venomously. "I'll get even." I simply smiled calmly and tipped my hat. "No, Margaret," I replied coolly, "you're already paying." With Margaret out of the picture, the HOA fell into disarray. The new board president, a mild-mannered retiree named Gerald, approached me with cautious humility. "Mr. Carter," he said, hat in hand, "we'd like to discuss the possibility of making amends." I folded my arms, leaning back in my chair. "Amends?" I echoed, feigning confusion. "For what, exactly?" Gerald's face flushed with embarrassment. "The lake situation," he mumbled. "We'd be open to negotiating access for our members. If you're willing, of course." I stared at him for a moment, letting the silence stretch out. Then I smirked. "I'll consider it," I said, "but only if the HOA agrees to dissolve its lake rules entirely and drops all nuisance regulations on the neighborhood." Gerald blinked in shock, clearly not expecting me to be so bold. But when he saw the gathering crowd of neighbors, many of whom despised the HOA's heavy-handed tactics, he quickly realized he had no choice. The next week, the HOA bylaws were revised. All lake access rules were repealed. The board's power was significantly reduced. Petty fines and bogus regulations were abolished. The next summer, my lakefront property became the neighborhood's favorite hangout spot. I threw legendary barbecues and invited everyone who had stood with me. Margaret? She was long gone, having sold her property and moved out of state, her reputation in ruins. Neighbors toasted my victory, enjoying the freedom I had won. As the sun set over the now private lake, I stood at the end of my dock, a cold drink in hand, and smiled. I came here for peace, I whispered to myself, watching the sun dip behind the tree line. And now I own it,